I always found solace in the predictable shadow trailing behind me as I walked the halls of Marwood High. It was a constant, unspoken companion that had followed me since my first timid steps into kindergarten. That is, until the day the shadows vanished. It was a Thursday, brighter than usual, with sunlight spilling relentlessly through the classroom windows. I first noticed something amiss during Mr. Kelton's morning lecture on Hamlet. As he paced before the chalkboard, his movement seemed bizarrely weightless, untethered. That's when I saw it, or rather didn't see it. His shadow was gone. Glancing around, a cold prickle slid down my spine. Where there should have been a classroom full of lanky, distorted shadows, there were none. My classmates sat, sunlight bathing their feet, no dark mirror images stretching out from their souls. Whispers broke out as everyone noticed the anomaly. Some laughed it off, chalking it up to a freak trick of light. But an uneasy tension hummed beneath our chuckles and scoffs. Then, things started to change. Jenny, always the shy one, stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Her voice, typically a timid whisper, boomed across the room. "Why are we even studying this dead guy? Let's study something real for a change." Her outburst left Mr. Kelton speechless. His usual stern command evaporated in the strange, shadowless room. The changes escalated during lunch. Without their shadows, people didn't just act differently, they were different. Mike, a notorious bully, suddenly became meek, almost invisible among the throngs of students. He sidled along the walls, his eyes wide and darting. Lara, on the other hand, who had never spoken out against Mike's tyranny, confronted him in front of everyone, her voice slicing through the cafeteria din. "You're nothing but a coward, Mike. See how you like it," she shouted, and the crowd parted, leaving Mike isolated, a spectacle of fallen grace. By the time the final bell rang, the school was in chaos. Students who had always followed rules were defying them openly, turning classrooms into stages for their suppressed desires and secret vendettas. The halls echoed with the sounds of arguments, laughter, and the occasional shatter of glass. I walked home alone, the absence of my shadow making me feel as if part of me had been erased. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed a strange thing. My shadow did not return with the setting sun, nor did the street lamps cast any dark companions on the sidewalk. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about the day. Without shadows, without those silent dark followers, we had all revealed parts of ourselves usually kept hidden. Freed from the visual tether to our quieter selves, everyone's darker natures had slipped the leash. The next morning, I approached the school with a knot in my stomach, unsure of what awaited me. The sunrise was just as bright, the light just as harsh. But as I stepped onto the school grounds, a collective sigh rippled through the air. Our shadows were back, stretching out on the concrete like long-lost friends. As we entered the building, a murmur of normalcy began to rebuild itself. Mike glanced around, his demeanor subdued, almost penitent. Jenny whispered apologies to Mr. Kelton, who nodded with a grave sort of understanding. Everyone seemed eager to slip back into their old selves, to let the darkness under their feet hold the weight of their darkest impulses once more. Yet, something had shifted. A truth had been unveiled in that shadowless day, a glimpse of what lurked within us all when unchained from our silent, dark twins. And while our shadows had returned, the memory of their absence and the chaos it had wrought lingered, a dark specter that no amount of light could fully erase. I always took the same bus home from school, the number 21, which looped around Maple Street before dropping us off. It was as predictable as clockwork. But today, as I hoisted myself onto the familiar faded blue seat, something felt off. The bus was empty, which was unusual since I was usually among the last to be picked up. Even stranger, the driver wasn't Mr. Jennings, our regular bus driver with his crooked spectacles and warm, reassuring grin. Instead, a thin, pale man with hollow eyes stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel. "Afternoon," I muttered, but he didn't respond. The engine hummed a monotonous tone as we pulled away from the curb. Outside, the sky turned a menacing shade of gray, unusual for an early September afternoon. I settled into my seat, unease growing in my stomach as familiar streets turned unfamiliar. The bus entered a thick fog, the world outside blurring into indistinct shapes and ghostly shadows. I strained my eyes to see through the haze, but recognized nothing. We were definitely not on our usual route home. Panic started to creep in, and I rushed to the front. "Excuse me, you've taken the wrong turn." My voice wavered more than I intended. The driver remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road. I turned around to see if any of the other kids had noticed, but the realization hit me like a cold wave. There were no other kids, just rows and rows of empty seats. The fog outside deepened, swallowing the landscape into a void of white. The bus's interior seemed to grow colder. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to make sense of the situation. An idea struck me, and I dashed to the back of the bus, rummaging through the emergency tools under a seat. I found a flashlight and shone it around, looking for something, anything, that could explain this nightmare. As the light swept over the seats, it caught something on the floor by the driver's area. A cap. Mr. Jennings' cap. My heart raced as I picked it up, noticing for the first time a set of coordinates scribbled on the inside. They looked hastily written, almost desperate. With the driver still silent as stone, I took out my phone, my fingers trembling as I entered the coordinates. They pointed to a location far off our normal path, deep within the woods that bordered our town. I had to make a decision. The fog outside didn't seem to be lifting, and my unease turned into terror. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the driver. "We need to go here," I said, showing him the phone. For the first time, he turned to look at me, his eyes hollow with a depth of sadness that was almost palpable. He nodded slowly, then turned the bus toward the coordinates. As we drove, the fog began to thin, revealing gnarled trees and an unkempt trail leading deeper into the forest. The bus stopped at the edge of a clearing. "Go," the driver whispered, his voice a dry rasp. I hesitated, then stepped off the bus, Mr. Jennings' cap clutched in my hand. The fog seemed to dance around the edges of the clearing, creating eerie shapes that whispered and moaned. In the center, a small, dilapidated shack appeared, as if materializing from the mist itself. Heart pounding, I walked towards it, the ground swallowing my steps in silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and despair. A figure lay crumpled in the corner, barely moving. "Mr. Jennings?" I approached slowly. The figure stirred, coughing dryly. It was him, older and frailer than I remembered from just this morning. "They took me," he rasped, his eyes wide with fear. "Took your bus, to lure you. Others." His words were broken, pained. I helped him up, supporting his weight as we stumbled back to the bus. The driver was gone, the engine idling softly in the quiet woods. With Mr. Jennings' guidance, I drove us back through the fog, which seemed to recoil and fade with each mile we reclaimed towards home. As we emerged from the mist, the familiar sights of our town welcomed us back from whatever limbo we had escaped. We never spoke of it to others, who wouldn't believe us anyway. Sometimes, on particularly foggy afternoons, I'd glance at the bus stop, half expecting to see that other driver, his hollow eyes searching for another soul to wander the fog. But he never came back, and neither did the fog. In the quiet and often overlooked corner of Jamesfield High, there exists a peculiar legend that I never thought to be true until my final year. It was whispered among students and scribbled in the margins of old textbooks, the tale of the staircase to nowhere. They said it appeared at random, hidden behind a door that wasn't always there. Those who dared to ascend it found themselves lost in parts of the school steeped in another era, or sometimes in no recognizable time at all. One autumn evening, as the sky blended into shades of orange and purple, I stumbled upon this mysterious staircase. It was just after the drama club had wrapped up. The halls were deserted, echoing with the silence of the day ended. I turned down a corridor I'd passed 100 times before, only to see a door slightly ajar that I swear wasn't there yesterday, or ever. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I pushed the door open. A narrow staircase spiraled upwards, disappearing into a shroud of darkness. A chill ran down my spine, but my feet moved of their own accord. With each step, the sounds from the school below faded into a hushed whisper, replaced by a low, eerie hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves. As I reached the top, the staircase ended abruptly in front of another door, ornately carved and dusted with age. I hesitated, hand poised over the doorknob, my heart pounding through the silence. With a deep breath, I opened it. The room beyond was out of place. A classroom, but not like any I had seen at Jamesfield. The wooden desks were covered in inkwells and quill pens. Maps of the world, showing borders long outdated, hung from the walls. A chalkboard bore a date, September 13th, 1912. Confusion took hold as I approached the teacher's desk, upon which lay a newspaper proclaiming headlines about events I knew only from history books. It was then the cold realization dawned upon me. I was no longer in my time. Turning to leave, I found the door through which I had entered was gone, replaced by solid wall. Panic surged as I searched frantically for another exit, but the room seemed to shrink with my growing dread. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Looking for a way out? An old man, dressed in period attire, stood by one of the desks, watching me with unnerving calmness. Yes, I don't belong here, I stuttered, my voice barely a whisper. None of us did at first, he said, gesturing around to empty chairs that I could now see were occupied by shadows, faint outlines of students from different times, their eyes hollow with the same fear that gripped me. How do I get back? I asked, desperation seeping into my voice. The staircase allows passage, but not always back to where you wish. Each step on the descent could take you further from where you started, he explained, his voice a monotone. With no other choice, I rushed back to where the staircase had been, relieved to see it reappear. I descended quickly, the eerie hum growing louder with each step. Each landing presented a door, leading to various forgotten parts of the school. Abandoned labs with equipment too advanced for our time, or locker rooms echoing with the whispers of long-gone students. After what felt like an eternity, the staircase finally ended at the familiar hallway of Jamesfield High, now silent and dark as the night had deepened. I emerged trembling, the echoes of the places I'd seen haunting me. I've never found the staircase since that night, despite my searches. Some mornings, I wake up unsure of which time I'm in, the memories of those lost classrooms blending into my everyday life. The school remains unchanged to the unaware eye, but I know better. I had been curious, yes, but now, understanding the price of such curiosity, I walk the halls of Jamesfield High with wary caution, forever changed by the staircase to nowhere.